Welcome, everyone. My name is Audria Tops-Harjo, and I'm calling from Wellington, New Zealand. I am the COO at A44 Games, and I'm here to present the 6th edition of the IFX panel, which is focusing on South Pacific. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our illustrious panelists. We're going to start with Rocky.
Hello, everyone out there. I'm Rocky Sayed, and I am a writer, researcher, and visual effects artist based here in Wellington, New Zealand.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I am the chairperson of the New Zealand Game Developers Association. I'm also the head of strategy and business development for a game studio in Christchurch.
Hi, my name is Thomas Barra. I'm a indie game dev based out of Christchurch, New Zealand. My small team is called Knife Games, and we're working on a LGBTQIA+ focused RPG project called Shelf Life, which has been supported by the New Zealand Film Commission.
Hi, I'm Nate Tamblin. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. Either or is fine. And I am the co-director of Shelf Life, working with Thomas, also in Christchurch.
So let's get down to it. So I don't know, working in New Zealand, what do you find that it gives you more than if you were working any other place in the world? Like, do you feel more restricted, or you feel more free? You tell me.
The pros are that New Zealand really is a small place and you can know everyone. And that's like what I love the most about working in immersive and real-time and visual effects, is that you just meet everyone like literally down the street at the game developers conference. So many people were there. So that's wonderful because you have access to all the people, and people really are generous and share the knowledge. I think the con is that we're really far away, and with all this virtual stuff, like it's very difficult to engage, for example, with all the conferences that happen in Europe, because the time zone is dramatic. And I think we're all feeling this, but here in New Zealand, if you're doing European conferences, you're just burning the candle at both ends, because you're working all day and then you're getting online at night, and that's just a thing now.
One of the cool things, about being in New Zealand is that people, I would say, are a lot more open to talking about things that are a little bit more taboo in the States, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. But also just like people share their experiences a lot more freely. People are generally more open. I feel more confident reaching out to friends and mentors and other people in the industry to ask questions and say, hey, I'm having this particular situation. Have you been in a similar one? How can I solve it? But to Rocky's point, like, people told me when I said I was moving to New Zealand that it would be small and you would get to know everybody. And I did not at all. I totally took that for granted. But like, you really, like, everyone knows everyone else that you know. And so you have to be like for instance, when I'm out asking for feedback, I have to be really careful, like how much detail I give, because I don't want to share anybody's personal information or, let anyone in on any kind of confidential projects. So that presents like a very unique challenge that doesn't exist in the States. Like when I was in high school, I didn't know either of the two people that I sat next to at graduation. Like, I was meeting them for the first time. But here, I see people I know all the time, even in like Auckland and Wellington, where I don't live. So, but we also don't have 2-day shipping. So when you really want something, you got to be like, do I really want it? Because I got to wait 3 weeks for it. The upside of that being I buy a lot less stuff. The downside is, like, if you need something urgently, you have to figure out how you're going to get it or how you're going to make it yourself, which I think speaks a lot to kind of the Kiwi mindset of, ingenuity and being able to figure things out on their own, because they kind of have to in a pinch.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. So Nate and Thomas, I know you guys work together on your project. Do you feel that it's a blessing or a hindrance that you're so far away, or that you like Chelsea and Rocky mentioned that you kind of have a freedom because you're such a family or community oriented? Like, what do you guys think?
I guess like we're in an interesting position of sort of being quite new to the interactive scene or the interactive industry, like having only been sort of making these kinds of projects for 3-ish years. And even more so than that, we've only just started, going to the local kind of like game dev meetups and doing game jams and going to NZGDC for the first time just recently, which is amazing. And I think, yeah, the closeness, the sort of accessibility, the availability of people who are sort of already established in the industry, who are willing to actually kind of mentor you or offer like advice or feedback or support or just like general kind of good vibes is like something that I was really taken with. I feel like I just kind of showed up and felt very welcomed and very kind of accepted nicely. And yeah, I think part of that is also the Kiwi way of DIY, of grassroots, of kind of like putting yourself out there, kind of working on your thing, being a bit kind of chill and low key about it in a way that other people find like really engaging and accessible, which suits the way that we kind of talk about our project, I think, which is a little bit, a little self-deprecating and a little bit, we're just ticking away at this thing and we're not sort of very, we don't put on airs about it. And I think there's quite a lot of that with the other people that I've met. So it allows people to have these kinds of very relaxed conversations where not everyone's trying to do their elevator pitch all the time. Everyone's sort of coming at you quite casually, which I love.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's funny because like I signed up for like a mentorship for writing through the Film Commission, and it could have been anyone, in the country that got to be put as my mentor, but it's like my best friend from primary school's older brother. And like like a real Christchurch thing. Thomas doesn't have this as much because he's from Blenheim originally, but it's a real Christchurch thing to ask people what high school they went to, because there's a lot of high schools here, not compared to like America or whatever, but just for a city of this size. So you always ask like, what high school did you go to see if you know someone who knows someone who knows someone. And I like that vibe.
So thank you so much. Rocky, I know you've done a lot of research around and inclusion and representation, both past and present and analog. Can you give us a little rundown of like all the work they've been doing over there?
Yeah, so many years ago now, Sunny Tyke, who you know, and I co-authored an essay which was picked up by TechCrunch about the gender bias in visual effects. And what's interesting is I think it might still be the only essay. It was written in like the mid 2000s that exists on this topic, even though a lot more people are talking about it. And this is like pre-Me Too. And what we found is that when the labor movement started to gain traction in, it didn't happen, but it gained some traction in visual effects, the conversation was quickly consumed by men who felt that white men who felt that gender was a side issue, and that what we really need to talk about is labor. And of course, this is an old school thing. Like anyone who studied their feminism, particularly Black feminism, knows that you can't talk about these issues without having an intersectional approach. So I think like the inability to think intersectionally has been really damaging to visual effects. And that's something that we want to do now and try to do better. And so the labor movement is like a separate issue, but what I'm really focused on now is how is the technology, the way in which we use the tools, how is that haunted by some of the things that have come before in the analog filmmaking process. So like when we look at skin and hair shading, the creation of digital humans, like lots of different technologies, there are biases and problems within the math. And some of oh my gosh, my camera is trying to, there we go. Yeah, there's a lot of great researchers that I'm working with, people like Ted Kim, Holly Rushmeyer, who are looking at the math and the sort of physics behind why this has happened in computer graphics. And that's something that I'm really focused on now and very passionate about.
That's fantastic. So Chelsea, right where you are, because now you're responsible for BizDev with your studio. has gender, or you being an American, an expat, has that affected your maneuvering and how you move in New Zealand?
Oh, definitely. I think it'd be hard to say that it hasn't in some way, because I think I'm going to answer this question, but first by acknowledging that I come from a place of profound privilege, because I, grew up in middle America. And even though I'm a woman, I still am very privileged. But I would say that like the way that I kind of moved up through my career ladder, and the way that I did, the way that I thought about my career, I was very often rewarded for being like decisive and being, kind of like taking charge. And those are kind of qualities that I think corporate America values. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, New Zealand doesn't value those things, but I think it values other things more highly. And so I often found myself, in my work having to stop and like kind of go a little bit slower and say, okay, maybe this isn't a situation where I need to take charge, even though it feels that way, because that's how I've been like trained. What would be a better approach, and kind of how can I leverage my expertise and my skills, but also, adjust them to what I would consider kind of the Kiwi mentality, which is, more focused on, egalitarianism and humility in the workplace. And the really cool thing about that is that I've learned so much about my own biases, like through that process, even in things that you like don't think about as being biased. Like there are so many situations that I've approached them, even things like writing a job description to hire somebody, or like writing a project proposal. Like I've done that hundreds of times, but then somebody in the room will be like, yeah, but like the wording that you've chosen is going to make it less likely for women to want to apply to this role. And I'm like, no, it's not. I just wrote the requirements. But like when I stopped and said, okay, like, let me hear this out. I had never associated this like kind of take charge mentality with potentially excluding women and how I was contributing to that behavior. And so it's like, if I had never come to New Zealand, would I ever have had that opportunity to have that? I don't know that I would. I don't think anybody would have pumped the brakes on me, because that's just not an American mentality. And so that's I would say, been the biggest kind of change, is like, how can I slow down? How can I stop and listen and examine these things that I think that I know, in new and interesting ways?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's great. So Nate, you've been really great at kind of making sure that you have your identity is clear. You write about it, you create art around it. Has it been easier or harder for you, coming and being from Christchurch and where you are in the world?
It was harder when I was starting to come out, because I guess I'm just getting into this industry. And one thing that I kind of sort of jumping off what Chelsea was saying, you kind of like don't know your own biases or privilege sometimes straight away. Like sometimes I have like female friends will correct me when I have done something like that's maybe accidentally misogynist, or like, because when you like grow up female, you think, well, I know all of that, I've experienced it, I get it. But you do forget over time when people start treating you differently, and you start to get some of the other privileges that men have. So it's always good to refresh your thoughts about that and let other people tell you when you're doing something weird, because no matter what you're born, you can get that, like the society is misogynist in general or patriarchal, so it's hard to not have those internal thoughts yourselves and unlearn those things. So originally, like when I chose the name Nate, because it's short for Nathan, I was like, I like Nathan, I like Nath, but I'm going to pick Nate as my nickname for people to call me, because originally I was like, before I had surgery, before I was on hormones, I was like, I don't know what people are going to read me. Nate sounds a little bit more gender neutral. I don't want to rock the boat too much or have people question me too much. And now I find it, now that I've got a beard and a deeper voice slightly. I'm just like, I don't want people to assume that I'm a cis man. So I want to tell people I'm not that. I don't want to be that. It's weird having to like telling people that with people who don't know at all that you're trans, because in my job, people saw me transition. I've moved to a different role in the company. And lots of people didn't know I was trans. And I was like, one person was talking to me about having hard periods. And I was like, I know all about that. And I had to be kind of like, I'm trans, by the way, so I get what you're talking about. This really sucks. But it's so awkward to kind of like out yourself because you don't know whether someone is going to be cool about it or weird about it. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, no, that's cute. So Thomas, what about you?
Yeah, I think a huge part of the way that we've approached our project has been not coming at it from the perspective of, oh, we already know everything, because our 4-person team are all queer, are all LGBTQI+, right? So even though that's great, and it does mean that we've got a lot of different perspectives to draw from, it's never been this sense of like, oh, we know everything, we're not going to make any mistakes. It's certainly possible to create things that are maybe, I don't know, able to be misinterpreted or not sort of like conveying characters or storylines in a way that is like the best version of what they could be. So I think a really important part of what we do is a lot of like consultation, a lot of talking to other people, a lot of sort of, I guess, like kind of QA testing and things like that, trying to make sure that we're really like reaching out into different pockets of the sort of rainbow community within New Zealand for the works that we do, and not just assuming that we know best because these are issues that we've sort of looked at or dealt with before in terms of the storylines that we're writing or the characters that we're creating. And I think in the workplace, I guess I to recognize the kind of privilege that I have as well, there's a kind of awkwardness that you get where if you're like Pākehā and people don't know that you're queer or just make certain assumptions about you can really be privy to people having kind of weird, uncomfortable, misogynistic or racist or homophobic conversations in front of you, and they're sort of trying to include you in their really toxic and kind of gross combos, and you have to sort of find your voice to say like, that's really awful, I don't agree with this. Like, it puts you in an uncomfortable and kind of horrible position, especially if they're saying negative things about something that you feel really strongly about. So I've certainly been in positions like that, working in marketing and being around people having those kinds of conversations, and had to sort of try and find ways of confronting those people, or I don't know, putting my foot down. And I think it's a little bit easier as you get older, but it's quite hard when you're sort of like freshly graduating and moving into these kinds of roles. And I feel for people who are in positions where they're being, talked down to or talked around. New Zealand is often seen as like really friendly and really multicultural and really, really great. And it is in a lot of ways, but there's not like an absence of homophobia or an absence of racism here. There's certainly elements of that in just casual kind of unfiltered and cruel conversation that you can stumble into. So yeah, it's good to be vigilant, I suppose.
No, that's great. And for us as not New Zealanders, Pākehā, that definition for the audience.
Oh, I guess like a white New Zealander, I suppose. A European descent. Yeah.
That's great. That's cool. So Chelsea, is there anything else you want to add for your experience here in New Zealand?
I mean, I would say one other thing that I found in New Zealand is that there's a lot more kind of respect for work-life balance. Like, everyone kind of talks about it in the States as like a thing that we're all going to somehow find eventually, that like it's down the road, but it's always like just out of reach, but we'll get there. I definitely never had it when I worked in the States. I wouldn't say I'm great about it now, but I definitely think my workplace prioritizes finding it, which is really nice. Yeah, and I'm, obviously I think all studios and creators in general go through periods where their job can be very demanding. But I've always appreciated that New Zealand has put an emphasis on, having balance in work and not necessarily, having all like the fanciest stuff or the latest everything a priority. Like all of my neighbors drive cars that are from the like 90s, which I also kind of love, right? Like you don't see people constantly getting new cars. So, 2 of them are older than I am, which I'm not going to tell anyone, but it's old for a vehicle. So yeah.
That's cool. That's right. Rocky, how about you?
I mean, I agree with Chelsea. Like when I first came to New Zealand, even though the studio that I worked at, Weta, was at that time in particular very international, there was this sense that the aggressive American corporate attitude of like, it's not even just like aggressive and corporate, it's more like the idea that is baked into you as an American, that you are exceptional and that your job is to constantly convince other people of your exceptional, qualities. And that is also very much part of the education system. So when I was at film school, it was all about like raising your hand and taking up space. And that's not a thing that's appreciated here in business culture. So that was a learning curve. And also, like, there are different ways in which you exhibit excellence. And, those are things that the rest of the world has come around to. So like team leadership, collaborative, work, and also like equity across like flattening management structures. These kinds of things are talked about a lot. And I think games in particular is more, they're doing a lot more work in that space. Like, what does it mean to run a studio with a flattened managerial structure, and how can you still achieve excellence? And those are things that visual effects has not done as well, because it comes from this very traditional 18th century filmmaking apparatus, which is hard to divest of because that's just how films are made. So, and then, a thing that I mentioned in our panel at NZGDC is that, like, in the immersive space, in Wellington in particular, it's very female led. And so, we've got Sam Remlu, we've got Jess Mannins, we've got Caitlin Todd, like the people that are doing, Chelsea, the people that are doing like the most innovative work and running studios happen to also be women. And that really changes the vibe of the industry itself. And then it has a great knock-on effect in the international space because they all go there and exhibit their work. So I really love that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all of your,
thanks for having us.
Your time and energy and your perspective. It's greatly appreciated. Until next time.